Hi, my name is Saul Elbein, and I'm a freelance journalist based in Austin, Texas. I've just returned from Southeast Asia, where I was researching the murders of environmental journalists. In Cambodia and the Philippines, I found a strong but unprotected press whose job it is to report on widespread environmental crime being carried out by powerful and lawless people. And often those journalists pay for their reporting with their lives. But first, a word on what it means to be an environmental journalist in a place like Cambodia. In the US, environmental journalism is a bit of a frou-frou beat, a little bit of a fringe beat, the first newsroom position to be cut when the money runs out. But in Cambodia and the Philippines, as well as in countries like India or Thailand or Brazil, things are different. Those countries have much less environmental regulation or government protection, and much less rule of law. Their economies are also a lot more based on logging, mining, and agriculture, whether it's legal or not. So what in the US is a bit of a bit beat is, in Southeast Asia, more like the everything beat. Whether it's pollution from unregulated factories, land disputes over palm plantations, or illegal logging in protected forests, all of those things are going to fall under the purview of environmental journalists. And over the last 20 years, as dictatorships have fallen across Southeast Asia, the press has become more and more willing to cover the environment. But there's a problem they run into, which is that the sorts of environmental crimes they cover often can mean big money for people who are armed, dangerous, and not used to being questioned. The illegal logging trade, which I researched in Cambodia, is a prime example of that. According to Interpol, the illegal logging trade is about the same size as the production side of the illegal drug trade, and the drug trade is a pretty good metaphor for the way in which environmental crime works in Cambodia or the Philippines, and how corrupting it is. In Cambodia, logging is officially illegal, but unofficially, it's a lucrative business controlled by the army and police. In the Philippines, it's common for local officials to turn a blind eye to illegal logging or mining if they're not carrying them out themselves. Now, in both countries, there's officially press freedom. You can write whatever you want, nobody's going to say anything, or at least the government won't say anything. But there's also near total impunity for murder, especially if the perpetrator of that murder is powerful. So the effect of all this is that environmental journalists can find themselves being targeted directly by people who want to silence them for the things that they're reporting on. A prime example of this is the story that took me to Cambodia. One night last October, a journalist named Tang Tri, whose story I covered for Foreign Policy magazine, went out into the backwoods of the forested Kraches province in the east part of the country near the Vietnamese border to document a shipment of illegal logs. The next morning, local villagers found him stretched out on the ground by his car, face down, with a bullet in his head. Tri was the 41st environmental journalist to be killed in the last decade, which may not sound like a lot, but it's more than all of the journalists killed in the Afghan war, and it's only the tip of the iceberg. Murder is just the most extreme way to silence somebody, the far end of a spectrum that includes beatings, arrests, or bribes. And every environmental journalist that I talked to, in both countries, had experienced some of these lesser threats, and they all faced death as a real possibility. And so they were left to navigate a dangerous world by themselves, never knowing when they were going to cross over an invisible line and get themselves killed. And that's a problem, because what I saw in both countries was that scared journalists stopped reporting. There's a real chilling effect from the attacks. This plays out in different ways for different journalists. If they're more professional, they may leave or not name names or stop covering dangerous stories. And if they're less professional, they may take bribes or go on the payroll of corrupt officials. But either way, the result is the same. Stories don't get out. As more and more of the world lurches toward environmental crisis, there's less and less meaningful reporting coming out of the rural places where environmental crime happens. The lights, in other words, are going out just as they're most needed.